That's why I was kind of weird that he went down there and was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah, senior.
Well, good morning. It is 10 o'clock, and I want to honor both your time and our guests' time this morning. But welcome to our Resound Network Town Hall meeting. I'm really glad that you have taken the time to come and join us for this. This is something that I hope that will be encouraging to us, but also informative. And so we're delighted to have Bob Bickford here with us this morning, representing the Resound Network. And so really glad that he is able to take some time to be with us today. Let me just give you a quick rundown of what we're going to do here this morning, and then I'll introduce Bob and then let him have the floor for a while. So what we're here to do tonight, or this morning, excuse me, is to hear a little bit about some of the issues that are going on in churches today. There is a worrying trend among Southern Baptist churches in particular, where churches are closing, and this is something that is worrisome to us as a convention, of course. It's also something that has been a concern of the Missouri Baptist Convention. And so the Resound Network is a ministry that has been started by the Missouri Baptist Convention to help and assist churches that are struggling in various ways. And so we're going to learn about some of that today. And so Bob has come to address those kinds of subjects with us this morning, as well as tell us a little bit about what the Resound Network does. But let me introduce Bob to you today. Bob is someone that I count as a personal friend. I've got to know him since coming to St. Louis. He is a pastor here in the local area. He pastors the Groves Church, which is down in Webster Groves area. That is a church that has been replanted, and so I'm sure Bob is going to tell us a little bit about how that went this morning. So he is someone who has experience doing the kinds of things that we're talking about. But he also works for the North American Mission Board. He's the Associate Director of Replanting with the North American Mission Board. So you're paying his salary. You may not realize that, or at least part of it. He is bivocational, but he does a number of different things in that way. He's also a co-author of two books, one Pathways to Partnership and Am I a Replanter? Both, I believe, I have not read them, Bob, but I think they are both about replanting and that kind of thing. He also is a co-host on the Replant Boot Camp podcast. So that's something that he does. What do you guys put a weekly episode out, roughly? I think roughly an episode a week. And so that's something that I've listened to and benefited from time to time. And of course, he's also a member of the Resound Network in the St. Louis area. The Resound Network is a statewide network and has local representatives in the, obviously, different areas. There's 6 regions of the state that the Resound Network has local entities in, if I'm not mistaken. And so Bob is a representative of the St. Louis manifestation of that. So I'm glad to welcome Bob and thankful that he is here. So I'm going to go ahead and give him the podium here, and he will present his material. And then once he's got to the end of that, he will we'll have a time where you can ask questions. But if I'm not mistaken, this can be interactive throughout as well. So if as he's presenting information, if you have a question at that point, just let us know. If you're watching on Facebook online, I'm going to be sitting over here at the desk monitoring our Facebook feed, and so if you have a question, just type it in the comments, and then I will make sure that Bob gets that question. So I'll convey anything from the online world. Our Facebook feed will keep the video there so you can watch it later if you missed something and wanted to go back and hear what was said. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Bickford with the Resound Network.
Thanks, Tim. Well, good morning. Good to see you guys. I want to welcome you who are here in person, and then also welcome those of you who are watching online. It reminds me of Sunday mornings at our church. We have a few who are with us in present for worship in person, and we're so grateful that we're seeing people come in person. And so welcome you here in person, and also welcome you who are watching online, either live or you'll be watching at a later time. So. Most of us pastors went to Bible school and college. We never imagined that we would ever be broadcast anywhere. So it's been an interesting set of months for us. But Lord's been faithful to keep the church together in various ways. Well, as Tim mentioned, I do work with the Resound Network. That is part of Missouri Baptist Convention's effort to come alongside of and assist churches as they're considering where they are and considering some decisions for their future. And I also work for the North American Mission Board, and the North American Mission Board Replant Team is focused at helping churches that are experiencing maybe some decline and thinking about the future and what steps they might want to take in the future. And so as part of your North American Mission Board, I am supported by many churches across North America like yourselves who give faithfully to the Annie Armstrong Easter offering. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of Dr. Kevin Ezell and those of us who are part of the North American Mission Board. We're grateful for churches. Let me tell you a little bit about my personal story. I moved to St. Louis in 2009. And my wife grew up in the middle of Missouri, in Marshall, Missouri. If you've ever been on I-70 and you're going from here to Kansas City, right in the middle is the highway that runs north and south. If you go south, you go to Sedalia. If you go north, you go to Marshall. That's where my wife is from. And so we moved back to St. Louis, and we worked at a larger multi-site church, and just felt over a period of 3 years there that God was calling us to do something else. And we believed that it could be starting a church or moving to another church. And there was a church on the southwest corner of our city, Webster Groves, called Sherwood Baptist Church. And here's a picture of it on the screen. It looks like a lot of churches that were built in the late 50s, early 60s, back when the Baptist Sunday School Board would give architectural plans and recommendations to churches about building buildings. We probably got some of those plans, and we designed this building. For those who love mid-century modern architecture and all that comes with it, which seems to really be back in style, that's our building. It was built in the late 50s. That building was finished, I think, in 1958, I believe. Well, Sherwood Baptist Church was a mission of Maplewood Baptist Church, and it actually started in a white house that was on farmland that was purchased out in front of this area on the southwest side of Webster Groves. And so they put up a sign, and if you were able to read the sign, what you'll see is they had the full Baptist slate of offerings from Sunday school to worship to evening service to training union. How many of you remember training union? All right. And training union was a discipleship arm, and then you had Sunday night church. If you were able to look at the schedule, one of the things you would notice is that they didn't start their Sunday evening service until 7:50 p.m.
7:50?
7:50.
Wow.
7:50 p.m. Now, here's why I'm convinced they did that. They were seeker sensitive back before they even knew what that was. Because young families had children who did not want to go to Sunday night church. So they didn't want to go to Sunday night church because there were 2 television programs on TV on Sunday night that they wanted to watch. The first one was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Anybody remember that one?
Marlon Perkins.
Marlon Perkins, right? Jim was out battling whatever wild animal that Marlon was watching.
Anaconda. He had the wrestle.
He did. And then The Wonderful World of Walt Disney. So you might get most of Walt Disney in and then you'd rush to church, right? So this was a church that grew to, at its peak, 250 in 1967. And then kind of stayed there for a while. And then in 1977, they had a sort of crisis that developed in the church. They had a forced termination. And then from that point on, you see stair-step decline all the way up until the time when I first came to the church in 2012. And so in 2012, they had about 40 adults that were left, mostly over the age of 70. The young families and the handful of children were there. They were either children of the part-time staff that were part of the church, or they were related through family lines of folks who were in the church. They were not really reaching their community, and so they called me to that church in 2012. Part of the history of that church was that it was effective in reaching the community at one point in time, and they even had an outreach to the local university there, Webster University, and they were doing English as a second language for the Chinese international students that were coming there. It's a phenomenal outreach ministry. But it's a church like many other churches that struggled at some points in its history. Here's a picture of the 25th anniversary of Sherwood Baptist Church. A couple of things that you notice is they have the red carpet that apparently every Baptist church had back in those days.
We did.
Yeah, everybody had the red carpet, right? What do you notice about this picture? They've got a choir, there's choir robes, there's some folks in the front. You see some young folks there right in the front, and you see people who have color in their hair, right? This is the 25th anniversary.
Because I can identify with the guy sitting on the front pew.
Right there, yeah. Here's the 50th anniversary. What do you notice about that picture?
Everyone's older.
Everyone's older. There's no young people in front. What else do you notice? You notice that there's a lot of people on the stage. In fact, almost as many people on the stage as there are in the pews. This was a homecoming Sunday for the 50th anniversary. And as typical, some churches that are experiencing decline, they'll have a homecoming Sunday. A lot of people who've left the church for whatever reason will come back and they'll have a great Sunday. But then the people who left the church will go back to wherever they've gone to. Maybe they moved away or maybe they transitioned to another church. And so shortly after this picture was taken, Sherwood Baptist was trying to figure out what its future might entail. And so they called me as their pastor at the end of 2012, and we began a process to try to pray through and determine what God might have us do as a church. What we realized and what they realized was that we were kind of at the end of our ability to do something, and we needed to do something significant if we were going to revitalize or restart or replant the church. And so through a period of decision making and discussion and changing certain things, we decided to replant the church as the Groves Church in 2014, in January of 2014. And it was a long process. It was not an easy process. It was a difficult process, but it's one that we felt like would give us an opportunity to reach our community. So this was taken just a couple of years ago. This is a pre-COVID picture, and pre-COVID, if everybody showed up at our church, our average attendance was in the high 80s and sometimes in the hundreds with adults and children. And the average age of the attenders went down from the high 70s to the low 30s. And so we began to look more like our community. We retained some of our original members. Some of them decided to transition away. But God began to do some really new and good things there with that local congregation. This is a picture, one of my favorite pictures. This was taken about 2 years ago. The seasoned lady on your left there, her name is Dottie. She's 96 years old. She played competitive tennis until she was 88, if that tells you any kind of thing about who she was. But Dottie was a day one member of Sherwood Baptist Church. She signed the Articles of Incorporation. She sang the very first special music. How many of you know what special music is? Right, it's a song before the sermon, right? So she sang this very first special music that was ever sung at Sherwood Baptist Church. She and her family spent many years giving and serving and really being a key part of that church. And over the years, as that church began to decline, Dottie began to think and pray and ask, God, what would you want to do? And so when I came, a lot of the church members said, I think we have one more shot. And Dottie was one of those that said, I'm going to stick around and see what's going to happen. And Dottie began to pray. And one of the things she prayed was that our church would be filled with young families and babies. And these are two moms that are part of our church, and they each have had a second child now. And so one of the things that Dottie used to do was she made she made an afghan for each of the new babies that were born into our church family. And a couple of years ago, in a year and a half stretch, we had about 25 babies born into our church family. And Dottie came to me after the third or fourth baby and said, I don't think I can do this for every baby. But Dottie stuck around. And in our members' meetings, in our family meetings, when we were going through the changes and those changes were difficult, Dottie stood up one time and said, I know that a lot of my friends have left the church, but I'm sticking around because I'm convinced that God wants to do something here, and I don't want to miss it. And so we love Dottie. We love several of our long-term members who just stuck it out and seen God do some really incredible things. So we decided for us, our decision was we're going to have to restart and replant to renew ourselves. And so many churches are asking themselves that question. There's replanting and revitalization, which I'll explain a little bit of the differences. The Southern Baptist family has about 47,000 churches. We are a strong denomination in the number of churches that we have. When I speak in other places with other denominational leaders, they look at what we've been able to do over our history, and they look at that with a sense of respect and also admiration. And so there's a lot of good that's come from our work together as collective congregations that make up the Southern Baptist Convention. We plant or affiliate about 1,000 churches per year on average. This year will probably be fewer because of COVID-19. But on average, we try to hit that mark of about 1,000 churches that we plant or affiliate. Affiliation is basically when a congregation that's outside the Southern Baptist family says, you know what, we want to be a part of the family of Southern Baptist, and they come in through affiliation. Unfortunately, we see about 900 churches close each year. And so what we realize is we're really not, if you just take year over year, we're not gaining enough to keep up with population growth. And so we're struggling. And of those 900, some just disappeared and we're not quite sure what happened to them. Some disaffiliate, they decide to not be part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And then some simply close because they've gotten to a position where they can no longer stay open. When we look across the board, what we see is that on average there are about 15 to 20% of churches that are healthy and multiplying. What this means is if you look at them in a year's time frame, you'll see that they have at least a 5% growth rate year over year. That they're reaching people for Jesus. People are coming in and joining who are moving into the area. That they're having a growth of some sort. We see that there are a bunch in the middle that are 60 to 80% that are plateaued. They're not really growing or they're not really declining all that much. They're just kind of steady state churches, and they might have been that way for quite some time. Down at the bottom of that, we see that there are about 15 to 20% of churches that are at risk of closure. Which means this, if something significant happens, if a couple of key families, because of their age, are not able to participate in the life of the church, not able to contribute to the life of the church, because they move away or because they pass away, or the church has some kind of significant facilities issue, or if they have a division and a certain number of people leave, or if they just get to the place where they just don't have the energy and capacity to do ministry much anymore, they might be at the place of closure within the next 1 to 5 years. So we estimate, on average, this is pre-COVID estimation, that about 15 to 20% of those churches that are part of our family are in that place or in that state. One of the things we realize is that COVID-19 pandemic is accelerating that. And we're starting to hear, as I was out in the field, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas last week, actually just yesterday and the day before, and talking with the associational leader, and he was simply saying he's had 3 or 4 churches just come to him and say, here are the keys, we can't keep going any longer. And so we're starting to see that, and we anticipate that we'll see some more of that in the coming days. So one of the things that we want to ask about a church is, how do we know if it's healthy? How do we know if it's vital? And there are a number of assessments that we have with the Resound Network and a number of assessments that we do with the North American Mission Board and the Replant team to help churches get an idea of where they are. So we typically look at attendance. Are people coming to the church? And that's one of the signs that we see. Attendance alone is not just a sign of health, but it is one of the signs. Baptisms. Are people coming to the place where they are trusting Jesus and then they're following through with baptism? And not just children's. We consider children who come to faith in Christ, we typically call that biological conversion, right? That a child is raised in a family, they're exposed to the gospel, they receive Christ, they trust Him, and then they are baptized. That's sort of biological conversion. But we also talk about evangelistic conversion in terms of the lostness in our community. Are people, particularly adults who don't know Jesus, don't have a relationship, have never heard the gospel, or never really come to understand the gospel fully, are they coming to Christ and then coming into the life of the church? We also look at cash. That's a reality. Are the resources there to continue to do ministry? Because that's an important measurement of the life and vitality of the church. And then also the dynamics. How is the church in terms of the internal dynamics? Is there a good sense of unity? Is there division? Is there apathy? Is there excitement? Is there energy for the mission, what God has called us to do? So these are all some of those indicators. One of the things that we want to say is that a healthy church is not just measured by those things, those are part of it, but a healthy church is measured by the way it makes disciples and the way those disciples impact the community. So we would say a healthy church makes disciples who make the community a noticeably better place. The church, as we understand it in Scripture, is a body of believers who are called together to worship God and glorify Him and to to make Jesus known in the community through demonstrating the gospel, through mercy ministry and care and compassion, but also declaring the gospel with a verbal witness of who Jesus is and why he came to earth and why we must come to a place where we trust him as our Lord and Savior. And in all of those things, we're seeking to make disciples who do those things, right? That it replicates and that it continues to grow. And that as we are living as disciples in our community, that the community is enriched and the community is blessed because our church is where it is. If you were to come to our church's physical address, the one things that you would notice is that we are right next door to an elementary school, Clark Elementary. One of the things that's true about us is we want to be a servant to our community. We want to bless our community with the resources we have. And so we serve Clark Elementary in a number of ways. Our parking lot is the pickup and drop-off spot for parents and their children. And so it happens every so often. We'll get a note from an individual, from a family who says, "Thank you so much for letting us use the lot to drop our kids off for school and pick them up." And we'll watch. I mean, the first day of school, our lot is just completely packed with cars and kids and people going into school for the first day of school. And they'll write a note just saying thank you for that. We also serve as an emergency shelter for the school. If there's an event at the building where they need to relocate, they have keys to our building and they come over. We have a soccer field. It used to be a softball field. Most churches have a softball field. You guys maybe have a softball field, or
Just a field right there.
or just a field. You got a really nice pavilion, though. I really like that.
It used to be across the street.
Okay. So the softball field, right? We have the softball field, and our church actually had gotten to the place where we had decided, before I got there, the church had decided not to mow the softball field all throughout the summer on a regular basis because it was just expensive to do so. And we had a contractor who did that for us. We had this big open field that eventually the city recommended a soccer club come and ask our church if they could grade the field to level, install sprinklers, install sod, and use it as a practice field. And so our church, before I came, struggled with that decision because some felt like it was maybe giving away our resources, and some felt that it was good stewardship of our resources to allow that to happen. And so the vote was about 16 to 14 to allow that to happen. And in our church's history, that was a tension point, unfortunately. But the result of it was we have about 250 families that come to our church facility and use our soccer field on a regular basis for practice. And so if you were to drive up to our facility, there's a soccer practice going on. There are people always there. Before COVID, we were hosting in our facilities AA groups, and we have a singing group, and we've had Webster University kids who have a college food pantry in our facility. And so what we've decided to do with our facilities is be open-handed so that the community would be blessed. And in many ways, it's made our church once again a vital part of the community. But in addition to serving the community, we want to endeavor to be disciple makers who make disciples who go out into their places of work, recreation, and their neighborhoods where they can be a blessing to those around them and communicate the gospel by demonstrating it and declaring it. That's really what health is all about. So some churches I go to see, I ask them, how are you doing? And they say, you know what, we think we're okay. And maybe the building kind of looks like this externally, but most often the building's okay. But internally, if this was a snapshot of an internal picture, some churches are not okay because of internal things. A lot of churches, we have the bones are good, but there are heart issues that are going on inside the church. So one of the things we ask is, well, if you find a church that's struggling or in decline, you have to ask them, how did they get here? Here's some of the reasons why churches tend to experience difficulty and decline and a lack of growth. They began loving something other than Jesus. And so you and I, as Christ followers, as the church, we're called to love Christ first. When we look at the letters to the churches in the book of Revelation, there's churches who have love issues in terms of how they relate to Jesus. They love something else more than they love Jesus. And so In some places, in some locations, churches can love the style of ministry or the way they do music or whether or not they have a screen or a hymnal or the time of the service or all number of things. The church can begin to love the things of their organization as a church more than they love the Lord of the church. And so when that happens, whenever we place something in front of when we place something in front of Jesus and when we love something more than Him, it becomes an idol to us. And it interrupts our relationship with Him. And it causes us not to follow Him fully. They love God's Word, but struggle with applying it to their daily lives. And this really gets to the heart of discipleship. It's not uncommon for me to step into a conversation with the church that's really struggling to hear them say something like this. We have a group of people who really know God's Word. Like they know God's Word, like they study it, they've studied it for years. And it's often true that there are a good number of people who are in churches that absolutely know all the different facets of God's Word. They know the stories, they know the key doctrines. But there's something that has disconnected between knowing it and applying it to their lives. And so, like James challenged us to not only be a hearer of the Word, but a doer also. And where we see this sometimes in churches that are struggling or in decline is particularly in the demonstration of the fruit of the Spirit. So you will have people who will know all of the doctrines related to the Holy Spirit and salvation and all those sorts of things. But there's some sort of disconnect that happens in the way that they act out their faith within the body. And we see that particularly sometimes showing itself shows up in divisions and disagreements and the nature of those disagreements. And so there's some disconnect between knowing God's Word and actually applying it to their life. They have transformed behavior, but not transformed hearts. And this goes along a little bit with what I was talking about previously. I grew up in a home that we always went to church, and I came to faith between elementary school and middle school. And my mom drilled this statement into my head. She said, "Son, we are Baptists. We don't dance, we don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't chew, and we don't go with girls that do."
Amen.
Right? Amen. We ever heard that, right? So I was this really, really good moral, like older elementary school and middle schooler. But friends, I can tell you, I had moral behavior, but I didn't have a transformed heart. And there was not a lot of moral corruption that I could have gotten into as an older elementary school, middle school. But friends, I remember coming to a place of awareness that my heart was not towards God. It was against God. And it was through the preaching of the gospel on Sunday night that I came to the place where I recognized my need for Jesus. But one of the things we have sometimes in churches that are struggling is we have people who are moral folks. They're good folks. But their hearts are not transformed. And we see that particularly in evidences of conflict and struggle over what the church is going to do in business meetings and votes and all those sorts of things, or personality conflicts that exist in small groups or Sunday school classes. And so that's a heartbreaking thing, but that often shows up in churches that are not healthy. They're content with doing church, not being the church. There's a difference between that, right? And this is hard for us. Like, for many years, it's easy for us to get into the practice of referring to the church as the building and the ministries of the church. Right? So I'm going to church. I love our church. And we talk about things that we can see. And so we get away from this definition of the church being the called out ones, the assembly of the believers who have placed their faith in Jesus Christ, who are in a particular area to worship, to glorify God, and to live on mission for Him. And so one of the challenges for us is we see in the local church, a church can be content with saying, we held the service again, we did our outreach event again, we did this favorite ministry event again. And so they'll check all of those boxes, but may struggle in understanding what does it mean to be the church together on mission in a particular area outside of our walls and outside of our defined ministry programs. In northern Mississippi, I was working with an associational leader in a church, a Baptist church who had some history, had diminished down to about 12 senior adults, and they had $250,000 in the bank that had been designated for a youth center. They had no youth, no young families, no children, and they were at the end of really their lifetime, and what they were trying to make the decision to do was, what do we do as a church? For a long time, they had been content with checking the box of saying, we held a service, we had an Easter service, we had a Christmas service, we've done Sunday school, and we have enough money to pay a part-time preacher to come and to preach to us on a regular basis. And so they've been checking that as they're surviving and they're doing church. But they really realized, came to the point where they realized they weren't being the church. They weren't being the people of God in that local place. And so there's a real wrestling with doing church versus being church. Often churches have a failure to address sin in their midst, church discipline. I could probably grab the hymnal, and I don't know if this is in your hymnal, but in some churches I go to, if you open up the hymnal, what you'll see is a membership covenant glued inside the hymnal there. If you look at the church bylaws, there'll be some point that talks about church discipline. And church discipline, just a general definition, is basically when I, as a covenant member of the local body of believers to whom I have decided to attach myself through covenant membership, if I, as a member, live a life that is not glorifying God and that is counter to what Scripture calls me to live and calls all of us to live, if I continue to live in a way that brings dishonor to the reputation of Jesus Christ and division within the body of Christ, or is harmful to me or to someone in my family as a Christ follower, then I give the church the permission to call me back to biblical faithfulness in the way that I live my life. And so most every single church that I've ever been in either has that in their bylaws or they have that in their membership covenant that may be inside a hymnal or in their membership materials somewhere. Unfortunately, churches that are unhealthy and churches that are in decline don't practice church discipline, and they excuse the behavior of old Bill who gets up and says whatever is on his mind at a business meeting. Or they excuse the behavior of Sister Sue, who is in the nursery and continues to gossip and undermine people in the church and be critical of the leadership of the church. And we just excuse that. Well, that's just who they are. Well, if we do that long enough, what will happen is the healthier folks who want to be part of a body that's unified and pursuing Jesus, those people will leave. And what remains is an unhealthy body. And so oftentimes we'll find churches that have never practiced church discipline. And that's a scary word, but it's an important word for us, and Scripture gives us a mandate. They also have lost touch with the community, and they see it as a threat. That the community, the lost people in the community are a threat. They're not a group to be loved and to serve and to reach for the gospel. When I was interviewing for our church's role as lead pastor, I met with the deacons and I asked them, well, guys, how have you tried to reach the community? And one of the things they said is, well, we got some bottles of water, we put some stickers on them that said, Jesus is the living water, come to visit us at Sherwood Baptist Church. And we went on Saturday morning and we knocked on all the doors around the church, and nobody would answer the door. Nobody really wanted to talk to us. And in our community, a couple of things are true. One is if you go door to door in our community, you have to get a certificate from the city that says that you can go visit door to door. And then secondly, our community is not really receptive to people who knock on their door on a Saturday morning. They just like, and I don't know about you, but we live in a culture right now where the door-to-door visit, at least in our city, it doesn't have the effectiveness that it once used to. And so they got frustrated by that, and they said, nobody's interested in us. Nobody wants anything to do with us. Nobody's interested in church. Well, that was a conclusion based on one style of trying to reach the community. And so the church, our church in particular, had to overcome that, and we had to think differently about how we reach our community. And one of the things for us as Christ followers in the church today is we've got to overcome this idea that there's an us versus them, and that the community that is around us is a godless community that we should avoid and circle the wagons and not engage with ever. We've got to overcome that, and we've got to come to the place where we have the eyes of Christ towards the lost in our community, to see them as a group to be loved and to be served, and a group to be reached with the gospel, and to do the work of a missionary to figure out how do we build relationships with them in order to share the gospel with them. I grew up in a time where place-based invitational ministry worked like a charm. When we could invite people to revivals or films or youth events or gatherings of the church, and people would come. There was enough Christian memory in the culture where people would say, well, sure, I'll come and check it out. And then they would be exposed to the gospel, and they would respond to the gospel. We live in a time where that doesn't work like it used to, and so we have to think as missionaries and as Christians, how do we engage the community in ways that help them connect with the gospel? They resist following the leaders, and rather they engage in frustrating the leaders. This is a kind of a truism of churches that typically find themselves in decline. Our governance was such at our church that I have a vacuum cleaner story that I like to share, and it's kind of a funny story, but it's also symptomatic of just how we were structured at the time. In December of 2012, our custodian, I'd been there less than a month, our custodian contacted me and said, our vacuum cleaner is out and we need a new one, and the janitorial company has loaned us a new one, and I know that it's over the threshold limit that you can just automatically approve through the process, that you have to get the church to vote on approval for it. So can you get the church to vote on purchasing a new vacuum cleaner at the next business meeting? So I thought, sure, let's do that. So we roll in there December. Now it was a dark December in Missouri, so time changed dark, and there was a threat of ice. And so on Wednesday night, we have our business meeting. And that particular Wednesday night, we did not have enough people to have a quorum in order to vote on approving the vacuum cleaner. Now the money was already set aside for us in the budget, like in the maintenance for the building. It wasn't that it was going to break the budget, it was already there, but we had a structure that didn't allow us, because we didn't have a quorum, to approve purchase of a vacuum cleaner according to our bylaws. And we all recognized together in that moment, the way we're structured doesn't help us do ministry. We've already approved a purchase like this in the annual budget, and so we have to think about how we structure ourselves in ways to say yes to things, rather than having to go through processes and frustrating procedures to try to figure things out. Now, bylaws are helpful and they're good, and please hear me say we have to have organizational bylaws and ways that we do things. But we have to make sure that the way we make decisions, it enables us to do ministry and mission, and it doesn't frustrate. It doesn't frustrate the way we do ministry and mission. I have been in a couple of business meetings where a committee is charged with finding a bid to fix a particular thing in the building, and so part of that bid process is they will receive 3 bids, and then they'll recommend 3 bids. And invariably, I've seen something like this happen where somebody raises their hand and says, well, I don't think these bids are good enough. I think you need some more bids. Right?
That's a morbid attitude.
Yeah, that's a morbid attitude. I love that. But you think about it. Those individuals were nominated to that role by a committee, a nominating committee, to serve within the guidelines that the church approved. And yet, our structure allows anybody who just wants to throw a stick in the spokes to mess it up. And think about the frustration for those leaders who, in addition to their regular job, have to call and get bids, and have to coordinate that with the secretary, and administrator, or the pastor, and those have to be written, and those have to be presented. And anybody can blow that up. And in churches, sometimes what we see this is everybody can say no, but nobody has the ability to say yes. Also with the pastor, we see this, that a church calls a pastor to lead them spiritually, and they believe in a process that says we're going to trust a pastoral search committee, and they're going to recommend that we have this particular pastor, and so the pastor comes and he is voted in by a high percentage, let's say. But yet, the way that the system works is it's structured to kind of keep the pastor in check and balance. Like you affirmed him by a large majority, but you don't affirm him on a regular basis at his leadership as he works with the other leaders of the church. And so we see that sometimes there's churches, they're just frustrated. It's a frustrating way that they do life together. So the problem then is not just a leadership problem, and I'll acknowledge, as a pastor, I've made mistakes, and all pastors make mistakes from time to time, so pastors are not perfect, but most pastors want to lead the church forward. And so what we see in church is not just a result of a pastor problem or a leadership problem. It's not only a strategy problem, and goodness knows there are tons of church books and plans and consultants and all sorts of things that can help churches address a variety of things. So it's not just leadership, it's not just strategy. When we see churches in decline, it's usually first and foremost a spiritual problem. There's something going on in the life of the church spiritually and the members spiritually that leads it to the place where it begins to decline. Either through division or through deficient discipleship, where a deficient discipleship basically sees the commands of Scripture as optional, as something to consider, as something that my moral behavior, I'm going to live morally, but I'm not going to fully engage missionally like Christ asked me to engage. So it's a spiritual issue. And spiritual issues need spiritual remedy, right? So the big question then, how do we arrest and reverse the death and decline rate of the local church? This is a typical picture of a life cycle of a church or an organization. There's the beginning of the life cycle, there's growth that occurs in a church, and if the church grows, it typically will reach a sense of maturity at its peak. And then if it doesn't continue to mature and to grow and to change, it will often come to a place where it inevitably begins declining a little bit, and if it doesn't address the decline, ultimately it will lead towards the death of that organization or that church. One of the things that we see is that a church can be renewed at the top of its maturity. If it begins to decline a little bit, it can dream again, and it can vision again, it can pray, it can reorganize, and it can come to the place where it can begin to become vital again. But if it doesn't do this, then decline will continue and death will be a result. So one of the things we have to ask then is, in the life cycle of the church, which approach is needed to address the cycle of where the church is and where its condition is at present. On the early side, or the initial side of the church life cycle, most of what we see needs to do with church growth, like helping the church grow. How do we address outreach? How do we address children? How do we address the people that are coming? And those are questions that are what oriented, like what do we need to do? Once a church reaches maturity, what we see is that at the beginning of decline, there needs to be a revitalization. Like let's revitalize this. There's enough vital that is existing in the church. We have enough substance, enough people, enough resources. We just need to vitalize it, just to bring it back to life. But the further you go down the decline cycle, the more significant decisions and the more significant responses need to be in terms of helping the church come out of its decline cycle. Revitalization, we often talk about this as we talk to churches. We often talk about windows or opportunities of revitalization. Typically, a church has two primary windows of our opportunities to revitalize. The first revitalization window occurs when a church realizes that it's in decline a little bit, but it's not gone so far down that it can't do some things to bring itself back up to a place of health. Sometimes churches don't do those things, don't do that work that's necessary in that season, and so they move past the first window to the second window. And you notice the second window is further down the growth cycle towards the decline and death. And sometimes churches have a second opportunity to revitalize. But if they miss that second revitalization window, one of the only options that they may have is replanting. Replanting is in a sense resetting things and restarting things. This is a life cycle of a church that we did a consultation with in northern Missouri. a church that had a long history of effective ministry, but had experienced some decline and some slide in their effectiveness. And so back in the late 80s, early 90s, we reached back and studied their annual church profile data. And one of the things we found was that they were just under 300, about 88, 89. And then they had a conflict that occurred in the church, and they dropped below 225. So they lost 50 to 70 people there, and the history, as we asked about that, was a conflict that occurred between the pastor and the youth pastor where they just stopped talking. And so they got a disagreement about something, and they stopped talking. And what happened is a number of people left the church, and then the church experienced a little bit more decline, but then they kind of leveled things off. And then you get to have a sense of, okay, well, things are okay. Like, we're not losing anybody. Let's all take a deep breath. Well, in this opportunity that they had to experience conflict, they also had the opportunity to address the conflict, to understand that, and to consider why did this happen and what needs to take place as we think about our future. But they did not really address some of those underlying issues, and so they moved into another season of decline when another church that was a newer, more contemporary, more modern church, had a different style of philosophy, moved on the same town square. They just moved into the old movie theater, and they began to reach a lot of the young families. So they began to lose some more folks, and then they had the opportunity here for a second opportunity to revitalize, to say, okay, what is it that we need to know? What is it that we need to do as a congregation to think about where our church is at? Well, they didn't really do anything significant, and so they continued to decline, and downward momentum continued to persist. They called a new pastor in, I believe, about 2013. He was a fine young pastor, a very good Bible teacher, a very good pastoral pastor, but he had on his back decades of decline pushing him and the church downward. And so the hope was that if one pastor could come in and reverse the decline, and what we see is typically that does not happen. That there are very few pastors, there are less than 5% of pastors who you could just drop them in and watch them revitalize the thing by themselves. Typically, it's an entire church that needs to come together to address the church's issues. And so they began to continue to decline, and the downward momentum persisted. And so they had gone from the first window of change being required, some changes being required. They missed that window to the second window where significant changes needed to take place. And then after they missed the second window to this area, this critical area, where no longer significant change would work, but they had to have radical changes that would help them address where their church was at. And so the options for them as a church narrowed because of where they were in their life cycle. Now this is a typical graph of what we see in a church that's missed its windows and has had decades of decline. For churches with prolonged decline, revitalization is not probable. Now, the reason why we say this is oftentimes when we go into a church that has a handful of members, there are some who believe that with God all things are possible, and that if they just work hard and they try harder, then it's possible that God could revitalize the church. I agree 100%. It's possible. But I also realize, and I also understand from experience, that the longer the church has been in decline, in some cases, revitalization is not probable. It's possible, it might not be probable. This life cycle, again, here are some options for churches as they find themselves further down the decline cycle. Revitalization is possible if you can catch the decline early. A assisted revitalization is when there's entities or associations or other churches that come alongside of a church and help them revitalize. A covenant revitalization is when a church basically gives over their day-to-day decision-making processes and directional decisions to a group of leaders outside of the church that help them think through and process through decisions that need to be made to help the church move forward. A replant from within is the approach that our church took to say we have gotten to the place where we need to push the button and do a reset to be a new church. And there were a number of factors that were critical for us in terms of making that decision, that we determined we're going to have to reset everything if we're going to have an opportunity to have our church grow again. A partnership replant is when a stronger church adopts or comes together with a struggling church, and then they replant that church, and we see some great success in those partnership replants. And then the last that we never want to see, that one that we work very hard to avoid, is a closure and donation. So a church that says, here's our facilities, this is still a place where church is needed, we have some resources, we have a building, we're going to give that to a denominational entity like association or state convention, where the church, where they can put another church plant in there, or they can start a new work in there. So these are some of the options, and again, this kind of goes back to the further down you are in the decline, the more serious the options are, the more significant they are. So the big question, revitalization or replanting, which is right for us, and that's the most important question. A revitalization, when it occurs and where it occurs, must address the underlying conditions that create the decline. Otherwise, a revitalization will likely fail. This is the why question. Why are we not growing? We've got to get down to those issues to understand what's happening here. It's not just, well, what can we do to bring more people in? What can we do to reach out to the community? Those are important questions, and you do need to ask those questions and do those things. But there's probably something that's happened inside of the church, inside of the church as a body, that's led to it coming to the place of where it's struggling. So here's the definition of a revitalization. A revitalization is a deliberate, dedicated, and protracted effort to reverse the decline or death rate of an existing church. Notice, deliberate. We're going to get intentional. We're going to get focused. It's dedicated. We're going to commit to doing these things ourselves. And it's protracted. I mean, it takes a long time. Typically, it takes about 5 to 7 years to turn around a church. And that's not always the case. But if you're doing a revitalization or a particular replanting from within, it's a little bit longer runway. And some churches have the resources and they have the people to do that. They have the on-ramp, we say. They have enough space to give a dedicated effort if they will commit themselves to do something that will bring life and vitality back to the church. They can see that happen. Some churches don't have that long of a window. And so here's a word math equation that we use to help us understand what a revitalization is. A revitalization is an existing church plus existing leaders plus existing structure plus history or legacy, plus renewed or new effort. So you've got a lot of what you already have, right? Existing. You got a good group of people, you got resources, you got a good building, you're in the right spot. You just need some intentional focus and some intentional effort to move the church forward. Unfortunately, Tom Rainer tells us that about 80% of revitalizations fail. And they fail because how many of you know it's hard to change? It's hard to change, right? And if we change this, we might lose some people. And if we lose some people, they're probably giving. And if they're giving and we lose some of our givers, then that puts us further back, right? And so sometimes there's a lack of courage to do something that might upset a few folks that might potentially lead to them leaving. Unfortunately, in some congregations, there are people in positions of influence and leadership and power where they just control things. And so some churches are held hostage. Well, if you want to make that change, then we're going to leave, or they'll organize within a church to vote down a church's forward progress. Sometimes there are no revitalization leaders left, and when a church goes down the scale quite a distance, sometimes the folks who are there are good, faithful servants, and they've been there and they want to keep the church going and keep the ministries going. But there's not enough people who are leaders of a revitalization type nature that can help the church move forward. And then also they fail because they missed their window of opportunity. So here's replanting. It's another approach to help bring life and vitality back to church, but it's a more significant and more radical approach. A replant is the courageous decision to close an existing church and relaunch as a new church. So the old goes away and the new comes along. one of the best things that helps me think about this in a practical illustration is in my computer, if I leave my computer open long enough and don't close Windows long enough and don't restart it often, what happens is it just gets out of sorts. And the little wheel spins, or I press the button harder, and as much as I press the button and think that's going to help, it doesn't help. It just messes things up. So I'm going to have to reset it, right? And that's what a replant is. A replant's a resetting of the church. So a replant is a new leader, plus existing people, plus outside partners, plus new people, plus new structures and approaches, plus the history of the legacy of the church. So there's a lot of new that builds on the history of the church and relaunches the church in a new way in its community and in its facilities. So one of the things that we often ask is, okay, which option is right for your church? And that's what the Resound process seeks to do, is to help churches thinking about their future determine which option might be right for them. So the Resound process simply is to say to a church, if you would like to invite us in, we will help you through a process that helps us answer that question. And the way we do that is we explore. This is the initial conversation that we have with the church and its leadership team to simply say, tell us your story. Tell us about your church. Help us understand where you guys are and what you're thinking and what your concerns are and what you are hopeful about. And so we do that through a discussion process. And then, if the leaders of the church feel that they want to engage with the Resound network, then what we do is we simply ask them to vote to invite us in to come and to take the next steps of the process, which the first one is discover. And that is working together to discover the data that exists in the church, like show us your trend lines and your historical data, your financial data. We do demographic surveys in terms of looking around the community to say who lives around the church. We look at the ministries and talk about the fact of, are they effective, or have they had a season of effectiveness, and are they diminishing in that? We look at where everybody in the congregation lives. We map them out on a little map. We do surveys with the congregation to ask you, who are part of the church, what you think about the church and how you feel about how things are going. And is there a sense of hope? Is there a sense of urgency that things need to change? Is there a sense of contentment? And so we do a number of different surveys with the individuals of the church and with the leadership of the church. And then what we do is we bring all of that back in a presentation first to the leaders to say, here's what we've seen based on the surveys and based on the data that we've been given, and here's what you have told us about yourselves. And that begins a conversation then that leads us, hopefully, to some recommendations. And a recommendation could be, we think you guys have enough vital substance there where you should pursue an intentional revitalization, and we have some tools and resources that would help a church do that. Or we might sense that, you know what, maybe you should consider a replant of some type, maybe a partnership replant from within, some sort of new effort to relaunch as a church. And so then we just recommend that to the leaders, dialogue with the leaders, and ultimately that presentation and that recommendation makes its way to the church, so that the church then can hear the study and can hear the recommendation, and then the church gets to decide together, along with the leaders, what God might have you do. One of the key things that the Resound process does and understands is we don't do things to churches, because churches are local and autonomous. We don't do things for churches because it's your church, you have to do the work. We walk alongside and we do things with churches. And so our heartbeat, our commitment is to help you guys discover what God has for you. After that recommendation phase, then the church would affirm these are the recommendations, either to revitalize, replant, or to repurpose in some way. And then what we would simply do is the church would have an opportunity to affirm the recommendations or not affirm the recommendations. But if they affirm the recommendations, then there would be a period of implementation where there would be a strategy of, okay, if it's a revitalization pathway, then here's the pathway, and here are the resources, and here are the tools where the church is going to pursue an intentional revitalization. If it's a replant, it's, okay, now we're going to figure out how to replant the church. And is it a partnership replant, or is it a replant from within? And so at that point, our team still walks alongside of you and your leaders and your pastor to implement those changes that you guys have affirmed. Our goal and what we hope would happen is that you all would come to a place, or a church would come to a place where they are vital and that they do come back to a place of health and strength, and then that they would share their story, and that would help us multiply the movement of replanting across North America. So the Resound Network exists to come alongside and to walk with and to help as a discovery process unto helping you all discover what the realities of your church are and determine the course of action for your future. And so we don't come in and say automatically, here's what we think you should do. We go through a process of talking with you and your leaders and looking at the data and then recommending some options for your leadership to consider and process as a leadership group. The goal that we have is to help every church become vital and healthy, because we understand that every church was started and planted and founded with the idea that in this geographical location, a gospel witness was needed and required. And our desire is to help recapture the initial purpose and help the church move forward with power and passion and be productive in being witnesses for Jesus where they have been placed. So that's the Resound Network. That's a little bit about the whole process. That's a little bit about replanting and revitalization. And so I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have here or any questions that may have come in online.
Feel free, just ask a question, and this is a time for you to ask anything you want. There's no limits on what you want.
We've only been coming here since like 2011. We're born here, like a lot of members of the church. And it's just like, when we first started coming, it's like, I felt like we were grabbed and we were being used. We were part of the congregation right away. Got involved in some real short-term ministries and stuff, and I was like, okay, I felt like this is a place we can go and we can grow and do stuff. And then it just seems like we've got a lot of the same people, but it's like we've lost some, and I don't know with what we've got. My thing is, we got to get out and reach the community. And it's like, how long are there things that we can do? Being senior adults for the most part, are there things that we can do and actually get out in the community and start doing things?
Yeah, so the question is, coming into the church, serving, being welcomed in, realizing that a good number of the folks here are senior adults, realizing that the community needs to be reached. How do folks who are a little more seasoned in age reach the community?
Or just, it's just like, I guess you have to study our church first, but it's like, it's just, I guess there are things we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that I think we always want to say to a church, that a church needs to be multi-generational. Typically what you find in new churches and fast-growing churches, it's typically one generation, and it's typically a younger generation. Right? And in churches that may be not growing or in decline, it might be an older generation predominantly. Right? You'll have different age groups sprinkled in there, of course, in both settings. But a healthy church really is a multi-generational church where you see the young and the old, and they're working together in the capacities and the giftings they have to reach the community for Christ. So an older generation can be very effective in ministry in the sense of getting into the community through, and this is where COVID has really made things challenging for us, where older saints and seasoned saints, as I prefer to call them, they have disposable time, or they have not disposable time, but they have capacity and time to give to places to volunteer and to serve in the community, in schools, in hospitals, in community organizations, in activity centers, and those sorts of things. And the challenge is equipping them to see themselves as going to those locations as missionaries who are there to demonstrate and declare the gospel. So demonstrate it, live a Christ-honoring life, right? Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine among men that they see your good works and praise your Father in heaven. So that's a piece of it. But also to be able to declare a witness, to speak of the gospel and to speak of Jesus. And so equipping everyone, not just our seasoned adults to do that, but everyone to be able to do that. And we understand now that it's more difficult than it ever has been to start that spiritual conversation. Right? an invitation, a long-term relationship, and building a relationship with neighbors or friends, inviting them to church, potentially doing care programs or after-school programs here. There's all number of things that individuals can dream and think and do together. And it's just igniting that process where they think about, how do I do ministry in this season of my life that's effective like I did it previously in a previous season of life. But it definitely, there can be lots of effective ministry regardless of what generation you find yourself in. Yes?
My question is you're using your property for soccer team. Are you all being able to be there while the soccer stuff is all going on and the potential of witnessing there?
Yes, absolutely. And so when we have young families in our church that are considering sports, and specifically considering soccer, we say, you go play with this soccer club, enroll in this soccer team. In our setting, there's the CYC, the Catholic Youth League, and so there's a lot of kids that play in that, and there are a lot of kids that play in the soccer league that the team, or the club uses our field that they play in. And so we say, if you have a choice, choose the one that meets on our field, right? One, it's close to your house, so you can practice, but two, use that as a missional opportunity. And then we also think and try to think through how can we be a blessing to the soccer club, right? As they start their season, can we hold an event? And we've done that before, where we did a giant cookout and celebration, and hey, isn't it great that soccer season's kicking off, etc. So.
And the reason why I'm asking that is because what I've seen over the years, whether it's been here when I, younger, when I came back here, when I've been in another church, you do the copycat ministries throughout the area. Oh, we're going to do the backpack stuff. Or, oh, we're going to get everybody their pencils and all their paper and all this. And we all do all these types of things that are just copycat stuff. And you're not really meeting. And all you're doing is providing pencils and everything else to the schools, and there's no real contact with people. And that's what I'm trying to see is what are the types of and I know this is down the road, but that's where I see some of the issues that we do the copycat things and we don't really get to the real work part of it in the churches in the area.
True. I think as Baptists we have been extremely good at collectively using our resources to provide for practical needs and ministry needs, and sending missionaries on our behalf who will communicate the gospel either to North America or around the world. Where we may have stepped back from our own personal responsibility, we've stepped back from actually believing it's my responsibility to share a witness for Jesus Christ. And so we might have lost a little bit of our effectiveness and our intentionality in seeing ourselves as those who proclaim the gospel personally. And so that's challenging for us. It's necessary for us, and it's one of the things that we're focusing on our congregation is how do we equip our folks to share a gospel witness, to feel equipped to do it, but also to pray, to ask God to open up those opportunities. Peter in his letter says that we should always be ready to give a hope for a reason for the hope that's within us, and we should do it with gentleness, right, and respect. And so I think that sometimes as Christ followers, long-term Christ followers, we believe we're ready, but we're not quite as ready as we may need to be. And then also the longer we're a Christ follower, this is typical, the fewer non-Christian relationships we have. And so there's some things that we just need to become more intentional about, I think, and prayerful about. And I don't want to ever diminish the fact that the work of God in a church and the work of God through the church as the witness expanded in the book of Acts was propelled by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
Okay? And so in our culture, we tend to rely on strategy and programs more than the power of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
And so when Jesus, some of his last words is, you will be my witnesses but the Spirit will come upon you, right? And you'll be my witnesses. We see that breaking out in Acts chapter 2 and other places throughout the book of Acts. And so I think we have to remove to a dependency not on our strategies and not on our programs necessarily. Those things are conduits. But we need to really ask for God and be broken before God and ask for a move of the Spirit through us as individuals and through us as a church, as a collective body of Christ, in order to make us aware of those opportunities and then for Him to go before us in those opportunities to draw people to Christ. One of the great pieces of confidence I have in the work of God in bringing someone to salvation is it does not depend on my effectiveness as a person who's a verbal, is the best verbal witness in the world, right? It's not based on my power to fully convince someone. It is based on my readiness and my preparedness and my willingness to speak a word of Christ and to have enough gospel knowledge to have the conversation. But ultimately, they're going to be drawn by the power of Christ, not by my magnificent presentation of the gospel. There's that partnership, right? And so I think for us as Christians in our culture right now, and as churches, collective groups of Christians, assemblies of Christians, is the power of prayer, asking in this desperation and dependency upon God to move through us, to reach people for Jesus, and the willingness that we might have to follow, and the readiness that we would have to do whatever it takes to pursue paths and programs and structures and opportunities that would allow us to have opportunities to have gospel conversations. So there's a lot there that is of a church focus and is of a pastor and congregation focus and a disciple following Jesus focus. I wish I had the silver bullet, outreach program that we could just give to every church in every room.
Cowboy church, how about that?
Yeah, I don't know. Some it works, right? Some it works. So that's a great question.
Well, one of the things that I have seen, is we think that we have to have this type of church over here and this type of church over here. When what did God do? What did Jesus do? He put a mixture of people together as disciples who didn't get along with each other, and He made them all get along together.
Yeah.
And that's
only by the power of Jesus did that happen. So we need all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. And I just go back to whenever Salem was founded here, whenever you moved from your initial location and moved here, there was the idea and the thought. And in the history of the church, there was a time when this church at this point in time in this particular place was reaching people for Jesus. And I think that every church that has a history like yours can reconnect with that and see God do that again. But it will take us thinking and doing and praying and seeing God move.
And it still can happen through this COVID. I mean,
yes. Yeah.
Because I see that we're getting the opportunity to at least meet people as we're out walking.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Not necessarily ready to do the witness aspect of it yet, because I don't know them that well yet.
Yeah.
But as you are out walking, you see people, you can say hi and introduce yourself.
Yes. Definitely.
Feet away.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
It seems to me that when you all do work with a church, and we've seen other churches do this too, they take the word Baptist out of their name. Why do you suppose that's true? And then also, I'm just reading this book that I picked up at the Salvation Army this week when I dropped some stuff off. 90 Minutes in Heaven. And that man was brought back to life by the prayer of the person who continued to pray because he felt like God was telling him to pray for this person, whom he did not know at that time. I feel like we need some concentrated prayer effort by many people in this, as many as could in this congregation, to resolve the issues that Salem has.
Yeah.
So I'm just not sure that the 40-something-year-old people, there's just not that many in that age group that are going to church today.
Right.
And I don't know why that is. If we, as the mothers and fathers of raising those children, I was thinking about that with I had two brothers and myself, and two of us remained faithful and one did not. You know, he was saved, but then he was not living a Christian life like he should. Well, then when my boys came along, I had two boys. One did and one did not. So then you moved from 2/3 to a half. And I wonder how we overcome that. It's just tragic that all these young families don't realize how important it is to have God in their lives.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, as we as individuals, because we had that program at Barron because of COVID, we had to stop that. And just hoping to reach the different people, young people, you know, kids in school. But COVID has just been so harmful, I think, to all churches.
Yeah, so.
I don't know how we overcome all that, but.
So I think there's a question and some observations there, and then kind of exhortation and all of that. So let me deal with the question regarding the name, first of all. It is not uncommon, but it's not always true that some churches who replant themselves would change their name and drop Baptist out of the name. But it does happen. I can speak to why our church made that decision. When we were doing the initial work, thinking about our future, we began to do community surveys, and we began to ask people, do they know Sherwood Baptist Church, and what do they know about it? And so we have a list of surveys, and we tried not to survey church people or Christian people. We tried to survey just the person who lived in the community who might have the opportunity to know about our church. And so what we discovered is that not many people knew of us, and those who did thought that maybe we were an older congregation, and some were not really sure about anything about us. And so our identity in the community, as a church in the community, was really largely unknown. Secondarily, when we did a dedication for the soccer field that was put in behind us, we had 250 plus individuals there, families and kids. And our church, we have name tags, we welcomed everybody. So we were working among the folks in our congregation, or in that gathering there. And one of the number one questions we received is, what kind of Baptist are you? So there's a kind of idea, there was an idea in our community about certain kinds of Baptists. Unfortunately, one of those ideas was, and we don't hear it much anymore, but at the time it was on people's minds, the Westboro Baptist Church out of Kansas, Fred Phelps. They did a lot of picketing of funerals, of service individuals and such, and they would hold up signs, condemning signs and such. And so our city, Webster Grove, actually passed an ordinance against picketing funerals. We have one funeral home in our service, and then they were also, there are churches that have funerals from time to time. But they passed an ordinance to keep Westboro Baptists outside of our church. So for some people's minds, that was, are you that kind of Baptist? And then the other was, are you? This is more of a contemporary culture reference, but are you the footloose kind of Baptist? Like if you've seen there's a movie called Footloose that came out in the 80s that was about a fictitious town, but it was really about a town in Purdy, Missouri that had an ordinance against no dancing, right? And so part of that was there was a church and they were condemning dancing, and so they would ask, are you that kind of Baptist, like that you're just against everything? That seems to be fun to us as a non-church person. So at that point, we realized that in our community that don't really know who we are, Sherwood Baptist Church, and some of the barriers that exist in our community related to the name Baptist, we are just going to remove that barrier out of our name. And for us, that was a decision that we made, just a personal decision that was a decision that we made for our congregation. It wasn't a statement to make for everyone. Similarly, a number of years ago at the Southern Baptist Convention, and I forget which year this was, Tim, but I would say probably within the last 6 to 10 years, there was a resolution or a move at the convention that churches could use the name Great Commission Baptist or Southern Baptist to refer to our family of churches. And the reason that that came up was that there were individuals who were planting churches in areas outside of the South who felt like using the word, identifying as a Southern Baptist church, there was, people were struggling with like what to know, you're not in the South, but you're Southern Baptist church, help me understand what that means. Or in some cases, because of our history of Southern Baptists and our founding related to racism and slavery and those sorts of things, they wanted to remove that issue and that stumbling block. And so they chose at that point in time either to call themselves Great Commission Baptists or to not have Baptists in the name. So we realized that for some congregations, they'll feel the necessity to make that decision. It doesn't mean that they're any less committed to the Baptist faith and message or the doctrine or the fellowship of the family. It's that they intentionally think about how they name themselves accordingly for the sake of mission. And so I think that's why churches wrestle with that some. And that is a local church's decision. We wouldn't come in and go, you guys just need to drop Baptist out of your name. You guys would have to make, that would be something that you guys would have to determine. Is that what God would have for us? Yes, ma'am.
Have you been successful in getting the families that are playing soccer on the field to come to the church and become
A few we have. We haven't had any join, but we have had some that have visited from time to time. One of the things we realize is that for us doing ministry in the community, it's good to get our people out in the community, and that our goal is, our service to the community is to get our people out in the community and communicating the gospel. And so there's a pastor who's in the church next door to mine. He's a different denomination, and he's been pastoring his church for, I want to say, 10 to 11 years now. And one of the things he said early on was, he said, on average, what we've seen is it takes about 5 to 7 years for us to have a spiritual conversation with someone, to see them come to faith in Christ. And so he has said that it's a longer term endeavor than it used to be. That was helpful. Related to some of the other things you said, I think discipleship and prayer are key elements in the life of any church, and part of the renewal of all churches centers around prayer and asking God to renew the church, and then discipleship, the intentional steps to disciple people into knowing God's word and living God's word. I think those are critical elements as well. Other questions? Yes?
I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you said that in going through this process, the church needs to take a really hard look at the contributing factors getting where we are. And I know some of those sometimes are impersonal, whether it's, well, there are these people in the church, they've been at loggerheads for the past 40 years, or this happened with this pastor 10 years ago, or this happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, and this person is still upset over what leadership should have done then. I don't even know if any of the leadership is still there, but there's still that underlying hurt. There's the old expression that time heals all wounds, but that's not necessarily the case. So as part of this process, how deep do we need to dig into the past in order to either go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, when you look at a church's history, you see that there are things or incidents that have happened, perhaps that have contributed to a group leaving or division, or just the beginning of a period of decline. And then based on that, even if those folks are not still present in the church, how do you deal with that? And do you go back and deal with it, and all those things? There are a couple of thoughts on that. One is that the local leaders make the decision about how to respond to those things from the past, which is important because that's a local leadership decision. The process that we usually engage in will take the timeline of the church's history, about 20 to 30 year timeline, and if we notice drops, then we'll ask, what happened here, and tell us about that. And then are the principal parties still here? And is this an issue that is an issue of repentance that you feel like the church needs to respond to in some sort of fashion? I will say in 1977, in our church's history, our church, there was a deacon, another deacon who decided that it was time for the pastor to leave. And so they two deacons out of the deacon body moved to have that pastor resign. It wasn't a congregational decision, but it became a deacon-led decision. There were home meetings. I have a deacon's logbook that has all of this written down. And so I turn page after page after page, and often it'll say there are no specific citations that the pastor's done anything wrong. And we had a meeting with this Sunday school class, and they were asking why the pastor was being asked to leave, and there was a lot of hurt and a lot of misunderstanding. But you can point to that time in 1977, and that's when the decline began for our church. So that was a key moment, right? And there was only one principal party that was still at our church from that season and that time, and that was the son of the pastor, actually, who was asked to leave. And so he had actually, the reason he stayed at the church in many regards was he was kind of frustrated with the church for what they had done, and was trying to stay there to do some kind of redemptive work. If a church identifies those painful moments in its history, and then the leaders of that church believe that there's some kind of steps, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, or public acknowledgement of repentance, or private conversations that would need to take place to either try to reconcile or resolve those issues, then the leaders would decide how to handle that. The process that we would go through would simply to be, let's look at the history and let's see what has happened, and then those conversations have at times come up. I have seen a couple of churches one in particular, a large church, I won't mention it, the name of it, but a church in our area, that in the process of looking at their history, they realized that they had wrongfully terminated the pastor for no cause. And in that process, there was simply an acknowledgement on a Sunday morning where he was invited, and the leaders of that church just apologized and repented, saying that you were forced to leave unjustly, and our church wants to acknowledge that, and we also want to repent of that to you. And as the leaders, we felt it was important enough for us to bring you here to say that to you on a Sunday. And so I have heard of that. I wasn't there that Sunday, but I heard that has taken place, and I think that's a local leadership decision. Other questions?
I don't have any from Facebook, but I do have a few I would just like to throw at you if I could.
Okay, yes.
Some of this you've mentioned in previous conversations that I've had with you, and I'd just like you to talk about it a little bit. One, I would just ask, what are some of the challenges or tensions that when you have an elderly congregation predominantly, what are some of the key reasons that kind of church struggles to attract younger families?
Yeah, so the question is when you have an predominantly elderly congregation, why and how does it struggle to attract younger families? One of the first things is that there's part of us as people who want to be with people who are like us, and so if a younger family may come into a church and they don't see other younger families, they want to connect with older families, but they also want to connect with younger families as well. So there's an affinity based, right? There's also some stylistic sorts of things that we have seen in the past. During the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of discussion about worship music and style of worship music and hymns or screens or all those sorts of things. And so some churches have never really fully resolved those things. And so the younger cultures in particular, those of you, if you're here and you have grandkids, or if you're watching online and you have grandkids, you know that, and your children as well, if you have adult children, you know that the phone is not used as a communication device for verbal communication, right? It just doesn't, we don't do that much anymore. The phone is used as a texting or a typing device, right? And so that's strange to us, isn't it? Right? But things have changed, and so there's some dynamics culturally that are present that feed into that as well. I will say that there are a number of younger families who do prefer a normative size congregation, which a normative size is a congregation under 199, and they do prefer a multi-generational congregation. And so I think we're moving into a time where we see some churches who are, because of who they are now, they have the opportunity to reach younger folks because those individuals want that style, want that type of thing. I think.
Speaking of generations.
Yeah, we have some kids running around. It's awesome.
Probably too.
So one of the challenges is we each like a particular style, and we each are looking for affinity, and so there are moments and there are seasons where it is hard to get over that hump and reaching young families. It's possible though, and for us it became possible, but it was over a period of time, and it was after a period of time, and so sometimes it is hard to reach young families when you're all not young families.
All right, well, I missed most of the answer, but I'll go back and watch the video.
Okay, all right.
I'm gonna watch the tape. Another one, just thoughts on when you do replanting. And I know you mentioned before you were mindful of the history of the churches. What are some of the ways that the Resound Network recommends for honoring that history, yet at the same time sort of writing a new chapter in it?
Yeah. So one of the best things you can do is to get all of the historical pictures and photos and things to celebrate, and have a Sunday where you celebrate the legacy of the church and the history of the church, and connect back to a time when it was vital and reaching and thriving and all those sorts of things, and remind the church of its history. And then as you move forward, take those elements, those pictures and those documents, and create a history room. And typically in a church that is replanting or revitalizing, there's an unused Sunday school room, or there's an unused gathering room that you could dedicate to become the history room, and invest in celebrating the history in that room, and remind everybody, look, this church was built on the legacy and the history of faithful saints for a long time, and we are doing what we're doing because of that foundation. As you also move forward, you realize that there are things that probably need to change and need to move forward. Some things like, we've seen this when young families come in, they want to know, when I drop my child off, is there security, right? And so sometimes you have to go to a check-in system that you've never had to use before because everybody knows everybody, and so you have to do background checks and check-ins and all those sorts of things. Sometimes you have to allow people, and I haven't seen a sign, so I'm just going to say typically younger folks view the sanctuary in a different way, and so sometimes they'll bring a cup of coffee or a cup of water in with them into the sanctuary. And they're not being disrespectful, but they're just what they do, and so allowing them to do those sorts of things. Our team lead says this. He said, "I've never seen a cup of coffee or a snack walk itself into the sanctuary, but I have seen a person bring in a cup of coffee or a snack in the sanctuary." He just says that to remind our mindset, they're people. Those are people, right? And those are maybe preferences that we could hold loosely. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Just a couple practical questions. Tell us about the cost involved in the Resound Network if we were to form a partnership there.
Yeah, it's very minimal, if anything at all. And the reason why it'd be minimal to you guys in terms of like the consultation part is you're in St. Louis, and we have 3 consultants that live here in St. Louis, and so we just drive and work with you guys. And so the Resound Network does not charge a fee, but they ask for travel reimbursement. If the church is in the middle of Missouri and we have no consultants, then we just ask them to cover travel and that sort of thing. That would not be an issue for you guys. If you were to choose one of the tracks that involved a revitalization program, or a revitalization effort, there are some facets of tools that are available that have cost to them in terms of facilitating you through the process of focused intentional revitalization. There's a program that we use, a tool that we use called Refocus, which is used with a leadership group from the church that walks them through, I think it's a 2 to 3 day intensive, and there's a fee for that. And I think it's probably, I want to say $1,000 to $1,500. But with that, you guys are walking through with a consultant through an intense training, an intense revisioning process, and then the consultant who's with you walks with you through the implementation of that. So the cost is simply for those training materials, which are charged to the Resound Network from the organization that does that. And I think the Missouri Baptist Convention underwrites some of that cost, and if there are issues, cost is an issue, then we figure out a way to make it happen. So it's very minimal.
So the discovery stage itself is basically free.
Yep.
And then it would just be after, if a recommendation was accepted, there would be potential cost.
Yeah, totally free. There's no fees for us to come and walk with you guys through the process. Once you affirm a recommendation, if there's any cost associated with that recommendation, then that will be where the cost is there.
All right, my last question, just in terms of the discovery stage, when you do your assessment, you'll come back with a recommendation of any kind or some kind. Is the church obligated at that point to take that recommendation?
They're not obligated to affirm that recommendation. We do ask that they would present that to the congregation and ask the congregation to make a determination to affirm that or to decline that. And then that's before that recommendation comes. The recommendation we bring is between us and the leadership team who invites us in, and then that recommendation is often, edited and formed and shaped by that leadership team who's been entrusted by the church body to enter the process. And so then the recommendation is really coming from the leadership team that has asked us to come in to do the consultation. So it's not a group of consultants outside the church going, this is what we recommend to you, and the leaders going, we don't have any part in shaping that, right? So the leadership team can shape that, and then that's brought to the church. And then the church, we simply ask that you present it to the church and ask the church to make a determination on it. Zach?
Yes, I'm just wanting to have it so that you articulate what will take place here. So if we start the discovery phase, we are under no obligation to take the recommendation at the end other than just to present it.
Yeah, we ask that you would just present it and make a decision regarding it.
Right.
So a church vote to affirm
so
it.
There's really nothing to lose in going through the discovery stage itself.
No, you can, yes. What you gain is you gain a lot of insight into where your church is at, the demographics, where the members are at in terms of their readiness and willingness, their sense of urgency, how they feel about how things are going, all of those sorts of things. And you get all of that as a resource that you can use however you want to use in the future.
All right. That's all I had. Any other questions?
Thank you all. You all have been great, and it's good to be with you here on this Saturday morning. And aren't you glad the sun is shining?
Yes.
Well, let's get outside and enjoy the sun. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob, for coming. And I'm just going to close this with a word of prayer. And you feel free. I know it's almost lunchtime, so we'll get you out of here. But thank you all for coming today and at least hearing out the presentation. And the plan will be at our April business meeting, we will bring forth this issue as to whether or not we want to start the discovery phase in a partnership with the Resound Network. So, but if you have questions, please ask them. If you had a question and you forgot and you think of it later, I know Bob and the other guys on the team. I have their email addresses. We can get in touch with them, and so we'll be glad to get those answers for you in whatever way we can. Well, let me close this with prayer, and then we will call it a day. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this gathering of your people. Lord, we thank you for what you have done throughout the history of our church. But Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom as we think about our current reality, our current situation. And Lord, we know there are many challenges and it's a complex situation. But Father, we know that you are a God who is powerful and who has enough knowledge to help us. And Lord, we ask for wisdom. And I thank you for the Resound Network and the ministry that they are doing in consulting and helping churches. Lord, we thank you for Bob Bickford and his ministry. We pray your blessing on him. But Lord, I pray your blessing on Salem Baptist Church. And Lord, I pray that you would lead us. And Lord, give us hearts of faith that we would follow wherever you might lead. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you all for coming. And you are dismissed. But feel free to interact as best you can if you'd like to. Thank you.
Are we shut down? We'll speak freely?